Okay, everybody, thank you. Welcome back for our first panel session of the day on the evolving energy consumer. And we were set up for this panel very nicely by the previous keynote speaker. So thank you for that as well. I am Professor Lori Bennear. I'm the Julie Plant Granger Associate Professor of Energy Economics and Policy. My primary appointments are at the Nicholas School of the Environment, and I'm also the Associate Director for Educational Programs at the Duke University Energy Initiative. And it's my privilege to moderate this panel today. And I want to thank Jenna for organizing such a terrific panel. We're going to, I'm going to introduce them very briefly, and then we'll just jump right in to questions. So sitting directly, now they're in a different order than okay, here we go. It's my first test of the day. Sitting directly to my left is Sharon Allen. Sharon has over 30 years of experience and is an executive known for business transformation and growth. She was the CEO of CGIP, which merged with SEPA this past year. And she's on the advisory board of Intertech Capital. Previously, she was the managing director of Accenture's smart grid practice and has other industry roles, including president of Elster Integrated Solutions, chief knowledge officer of Elster Electricity, as well as executive roles at ABB and IBM. And of course, importantly, she has her MBA from the Fuqua School of Business. All right, and then next, I got to go in a different order here. We have Chris Vlahoplus. Did I do that? I think I got it. All right. Chris has been a management consultant to the energy and utility industry for over 25 years. He leads ScottMadden's clean tech and sustainability practice. He also serves on many boards, including the board of Southeastern Wind Coalition, the advisory board of the EDGE Center here at Duke, and he also has an MBA, but from that other school down the street. We'll try not to hold it against him. All right. Then sitting next to him is Wayne Besley. Wayne is the Senior Director of Demand-Side Management for Florida Power and Light. And in that role, he's responsible for the development and product management of demand-side management programs for Florida Power and Light's residential and business customers. He has a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Clemson and completed leadership development programs at Cornell and Columbia. And then finally, at the end of the panel, we have Terry Sobolewski. He joined National Grid in August 2011. In his current role, he's Senior Vice President and Chief Customer Officer, and he leads customer strategy and ongoing efforts to improve the customer experience. Like the other distinguished panelists, he serves on several boards, including the Alliance to Save Energy and Greener You, as well as the EDGE board here at the Fuqua School. And I should mention he also served 4 years in the US Navy, so thank you for your service. And he also has an MBA from Fuqua. So those are our four distinguished panelists today. The way this is going to run is I have a series of questions here. I'm going to start by asking one of them to sort of take the lead on answering, and then the others will jump in. We'll sort of proceed that way for a while, and then when this comes back up, you can either scan the little box code there or go to the tiny URL and ask any questions that you might have of the panel. And Yochai will eventually bring me a computer that has the questions on it, and I will be able to present those to the panelists. All right, so we'll jump right in now with Terry. I'm going to start with you, and then others, please follow up. What are some of the main ways that relationships with customers have shifted over the last several years?
Great to be here at Duke. I think customer relationships have shifted on a couple of different fronts, but it's probably important to start with why they're shifting to really understand what's happening with those relationships. We talked a little bit about it in the prior session. Brad brought it up. A number of key drivers that are out there. Decarbonization is one, technology is another, but customers' values are shifting as well. What they want from their utility, what they want in terms of how they consume energy, that's moved pretty dramatically. And we see it in little ways and in big ways. For anybody who was following it, we had a pretty severe storm in the Northeast over the last couple of weeks. 400,000 of our 7 million customers were without power. 5 years ago, a 3-day restoration would have been pretty acceptable. This past week, we actually had some real reputational harm because of the rate at which the utilities in the Northeast were responding to that storm. And so our dependence on technology, our smartphones, et cetera, has really sharpened the sensitivity of our customers. So I think that's one key way in which we're seeing our relationship and their behaviors change. We're also seeing it on a grander scale, though, too. We have a number of demonstration projects going on across New York as part of the transformation that's happening in our market there. And one of the things that we've learned from what we call the REV demonstration projects is that communities are engaging as much as individual customers are engaging. And so we can talk a lot about what's the rate of adoption of the connected home or smart meters or thermostats, et cetera, et cetera. But what we're really seeing as a key driver to that is the way in which communities gather around these technologies or their collective needs and how they seek to serve those collective needs. And so we're seeing across Massachusetts, for example, whole communities embark on efficiency programs. We're seeing the entire island of Nantucket really become supportive of and advocating for a large storage project that we're about to do there. And so I think that's the other key dimension that we're seeing is this inclusiveness, this broader focus on community engagement, as much as we're seeing a shift in individual customer relationships.
Any others?
So building upon what he said, one of the things that has been changing is if you look at how employees worked even 10 years ago, 1 out of every 5 employees works from home at least 1 to 2 days a week. And as a result of all of us becoming more mobile in how and when and where we do work, our reliance on electricity is a little bit different. So as Terry said, 5 years ago, if you had a 3-day outage, people would be unhappy, but they were not clamoring in the press for the CEO of the utility to be fired. The expectations now among all of us, because our electricity means so much more to us just because of our work life and work ethic and the challenges that this is posing in the relationship is studies have shown that we typically interact with our utility less than 4 minutes a year. And so now we have greater expectation to have use of electricity, but we traditionally haven't interacted as much with our electric supplier.
I think the point you started with too is a good one, is customers' relationship with their energy is changing and their expectations. The interest is like we've not seen. It's one of the differences these days is the intense interest and even cocktail party conversation about the clean energy that customers want and how they want, how Brad's experience with the engagement with the thermostat, so that the relationship with energy has changed. But I think probably what is difficult for the utilities relationship with the customer is there are others that are coming in and establishing their own relationship. So it's changing the customer's options and their experiences with others that we've not seen in a while as well. The number of new entrants are changing that relationship while the utilities are trying to change the way in which they relate to their customers.
And I would say, just to piggyback on that, well, I have something in common with Brad. I did graduate in '88 too, so we do have quite a bit of, so go '88. Not from Duke, but I have an older son that's here. He's a junior at Duke, so go Duke. We were here a couple weekends ago for Parents' Weekend. But I get advice from my 2 sons. I have a 17 and 20-year-old, and they have their mobile phone, and if it's not accessible with their mobile phone, they just won't go there. So at Florida Power and Light, which is a large subsidiary of NextEra, it's the poles and wires regulated entity, we are moving all our transactions with customers to the mobile app. It's got to be relevant, it's got to be quick, it's got to be 24/7, it's got to be personalized. So that's where we're going with that interaction and building the mechanics behind that. There's no reason that you can't do most of your routine transactions, at least, with your mobile phone, with your mobile app, and respond to outages, status on outages, energy efficiency programs, get a rebate by clicking a button on your mobile app.
No.
Yeah, so that is because your utility has invested in a communications infrastructure that information has come back. Yesterday I happened to be with a large investor in utility who does not have that, and so therefore they don't even have the data or the way to interact with their customers. And this need that when you want information, you want it immediately and now. The technology in terms of convenience and using your mobile phone has become really important. Brad talked about his wife earlier with the Nest, and I chuckle because back in 1986, before it was named Duke, our electric provider here in this area was Progress Energy. I've had an in-home display in my house since 1986 that I've been able to monitor my usage and know when the peak of the day is. And my children, who are now graduated from grad school, have grown up understanding time of use. And I used to tell my neighbors, like, I've discovered something, and none of my neighbors were interested in understanding their energy usage. So it's interesting now, everyone thinks this is like a new thing, and we have new technology. And I think the technology is making it more cool. And using your app, we have seen from studies, people don't just get into understanding energy use. They actually want to know what's convenient. Is the house, are the kids got the lights on? Did you leave the burner on your oven? Did you leave your oven on? So it's more wrapped into, I want things that make my life easier. So. Yeah.
So I'm going to jump around question-wise because I just want to build on the conversation that we've already got going, which is a little bit about the question of what are some new touch points with customers. And Chris mentioned that there's competition in that space, that it's not just that the utility is trying to develop relationships with customers, but that there are other third-party entities that are also trying to develop them. And then Wayne was mentioning, his kids' relationship with their cell phone. I've had students say, if I can't pay for it with Venmo, I really don't need to do it. So, how are these touch points changing, and what are the roles both of utilities and of these other business entities in sort of transforming the way consumers relate to their electricity use?
So,
Chris, or I don't care. We could, yeah.
I'll get the ball rolling. In certain parts of the country, one of the biggest touch point changes were rooftop solar programs, where third parties were coming in, selling the rooftop solar and getting between the utility and the customer and becoming the more visible. SEPA, I'm going to do a plug for SEPA. They do a great program of fact-finding trips to different parts of the world where they're ahead of us. We went to Hawaii, where a large growth in rooftop solar, and the message we heard was that they called them the front porch conversations. The third-party solar providers were going house to house, talking to the customers in a way that the utilities had no need to that point if you're interfacing 4 minutes a year. So rooftop solar is, I think, one of the best examples where in certain parts of the country you're probably more likely to have interacted with your solar provider than your utility.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think there are a number of different parties in the marketplace, and that's creating a really dynamic environment which we're trying to navigate. But I think that you can look at it in one of a couple of ways. You can look at the threat of that, which is disintermediation, right? Being sort of left out of the customer relationship increasingly in the future. Or you can look at it as an opportunity, whether it be on the regulated side of our business or on the unregulated side of our business. There's ways we can serve customers. There's demands and desires that they have which we can satisfy, ways in which we can create value that really weren't on our radar 10 years ago. And that's a huge opportunity, I think.
Just to piggyback on that, if you think about it, a lot of times utilities are serving customers by segments. So the large commercial industrial customers, Duke University has an assigned account team to handle all their needs, billing, reliability, construction. Then you have another segment of small, medium business, which is sometimes called the forgotten segment because they're a small business owner, a dry cleaning owner. They don't have time to understand a lot about energy efficiency, but they want to be efficient. So how do you manage that segment of customers? Then you have the residential customers, and I think in the next 5 years, that's where the big change is going to be. Those are the customers that want the mobile applications. Their experience has gone from a call center rep on the other end of the phone to an IVR. Hopefully it's designed reasonably well, or you'll get exits. And then now the future is robotics, virtual assistant, a personal assistant, some element that when I call the utility of the future, it actually sends me a text and I start the dialogue back with a personal assistant that knows my account, knows my history, and can give me routine answers to my questions. And in the event that something has to be escalated, then it's a more seamless escalation.
So one of the things that Wayne just pointed out, if we roll back even 15 years ago, if you went into a typical utility and asked what your customer segments were, they would say industrial, large commercial, light commercial, residential, and that was our customer segmentation. And I think there is greater recognition, and most utilities absolutely understand that they've got to understand their customers differently as to what is important to them. And case in point, it's been announced in Arizona, a new area that is being built out is about 2,000 homes, where on every home is going to be solar and storage. And the battery owner, it's a German company called Sonnen, they're building all this in with the expectation that they're going to sell excess capacity back to the utility. And so I was with the local utility and asking them, there is not an arrangement that's made. And then a week later, I happened to be in another utility. We were in a meeting. I was telling a senior executive, hey, I saw this solar being built in this neighborhood as I was driving to your building. And they're like, what? And over lunch, they were so disturbed by it, they went to drive out to see this new development area. Because for a utility, if all of a sudden they're unaware of this third party who is now building solar and storage in their area, it is that disintermediation. And so understanding, okay, how do I get in front of it? How do I offer programs to my customers such that they would subscribe to that service through me rather than going to a third party? And I'll bounce the ball to you down there, Terry, because you guys really are focused on innovation and trying to get in front of new programs that would reach specific customer segments.
Yeah, well, I mean, it goes to that point you were just mentioning on segmentation, right? We've gone from segmenting in very crude terms to thinking about behavioral segmentation to really now thinking about personalization. We've kind of blown right through traditional segmentation methods, and really we've tried to start to think about what would it look like to really understand every single one of our customers on an individual basis and then serve them. And what's really cool about it is the technology is there to do it. I mean, Amazon does it for us every day, right? So what it requires is that we invest.
Yep.
And I think that's the key thing that I'm hearing, that I see within our own company and that I hear from colleagues. We actually did an exercise with Navigant this summer where we spoke with the chief customer officers of the top 5 or 6 leading utilities in the country. And every one of them has a customer transformation program. Every one of them is investing heavily in the technologies that they need to personalize and deliver points of interaction. What do those touch points with customers look like? They're all investing to deliver fundamentally better points of interaction with their customers in an attempt to avoid that disintermediation.
Yeah. And to your question of touch points is, regardless of who is serving that role, there is an explosion of the touch points from 10 years ago when the touch point was, I buy my kilowatt hour. Yeah. I can buy a rooftop solar. I can buy an electric vehicle that has a role in the grid. I can buy a battery. I can be aggregated for demand response in California. I have corporate PPAs, purchase power agreements for renewables where corporations go directly. You have a number of these technology. Energy management information systems are well beyond what we've seen in the past. They're not just off of smart meters, but systems you can put in your house to manage your usage. So the technology has exploded those numbers of interactions that wouldn't even have been possible 10 years ago.
Yeah. I would say also it's a mindset, it's a philosophy, it's a culture. Florida Power and Light, being a subsidiary of NextEra, the largest wind developer, solar developer, you have to not get worried about that neighborhood that's putting rooftop solar. You have to embrace it. It's going to change. The change is going to happen anyways. So what role do you play? And your role may be different depending on if you're a regulated entity or a deregulated entity. And your customers expect you to play that role. And how can you help them? How can you, even if you don't offer a rebate for rooftop solar, how do you make the application less burdensome? Don't block with, it's so difficult to do the interconnect, or I have to wait 60 days. That's just going to annoy your customers. So I think you have to, it's a mindset that you have to embrace, disrupt yourself in certain areas, disrupt yourself intelligently. And I think you're also going to attract talent who likes that way of thinking. So you're going to eventually evolve and develop great new skill sets.
Yeah. That's a great segue. Sharon, I'm going to come back to the question for you, which was, what are the major threats and opportunities that we see in the sector? We've talked about a few already, right? We talked about the role of third parties. We talked about, you mentioned the changing way in which people are working and how that changes their expectations about electricity reliability. We've talked about just changes in consumer preferences. Are there other threats or particular opportunities in this space that all of this new technology affords?
So, there's different perspectives. So if we look at it from a deregulated side or a regulated side or a customer perspective, those threats are going to be different. So we've kind of touched on the disintermediation that could be a threat to the utility, because the minute someone's in between you and your customer, then you start to lose that relationship. And we know that loyal customers are more engaged customers. But the other threats that we have to the overall reliability of the system, and this is something that is of great concern to utilities, is we have third parties coming in offering services. I would tell you today, unless it's a large customer, but with residential or even like commercial, as people begin to add solar and storage to their systems, utility doesn't always know. They're a little bit blind to that going on. And it is, in some places, starting to raise its head in terms of having high voltage on certain sections of their feeder, which is a concern in terms of the reliability. The other thing that impacts a utility, so I'm not going to say threat focused on revenue, something that is of great concern is utilities they're in the mission of delivering reliable, safe, efficient, economic energy. And now if we've got two-way power flows, what's the changes to our lockout procedures and the processes when we've got field crews out there? So this is, I'd say, a real threat to the existing business processes, because they're going to have to change as we have a higher penetration of DER on the system. The other thing that is a threat that is being faced with is how do we reward investment and have the risk associated with that. So today, a utility is held to a reliability standard, and if they don't meet that standard, they can be fined like $10,000 an event, a day. There are groups popping up, more popular in California, called a CCA, a community choice aggregator, where they can aggregate and sell to a group of folks and then essentially bid it into the wholesale market. They're not held to the same reliability standard that a utility does. So the threat we have is that we've got business models changing, we've got third parties coming in, disintermediate, and we've got technology that's coming into our grid that is fundamentally changing the electrical characteristics, which threatens overall reliability.
Any others?
Yeah, I would say, definitely look at the threats as opportunities. Just in that example, solar is the future, renewables, distributed renewables is the future, it is going to create some variability on the grid. So in our case, we're looking now at saying, okay, we have one of the largest demand response programs in the country, 1,800 megawatts, 800,000 customers. So we're looking to see what role can demand response with these customers who we already have a relationship. How can they help to stabilize the grid to encourage more renewables, be it rooftop solar or central solar? So we're looking now at what does that characteristic look like? Today we use our demand response for capacity events, but now we're looking for a new use case to say, well, how do we make this more relevant? How do participants feel that they're contributing in whatever manner they can to making the grid stable and ready for additional renewables? So you don't fight the renewables, you look at ways how you can say, okay, what role do we play? How can we work with customers? And how can we build the future? I think it's a mindset, again, goes back to the culture of your company.
If I can add, I really think it's great that you brought in culture and talent a moment ago as well, Wayne. I mean, I think we could go on for a while listing the threats and opportunities in the industry. But I think the strategic question is, how do you respond to that? How do you deal with that, whether it be as a utility or a market participant in some other form or fashion? And I think that the way you deal with the myriad of threats and challenges is you put the best team on the field. You find the very best talent. It's why I think a lot of us are here this week. And you find ways to put that talent into a position to make, to apply their judgment, to apply their knowledge and expertise, and to help guide the company through. I think the second thing I would add is just listening to customers. We can't, Brad said it, we can't predict the future. We don't know what those scenarios will lead us to, but if we listen really carefully to our customers, and if we focus on the talent within our organizations will be able to adapt and respond to those shifts. And so, from a strategic perspective, I think that's what we need to focus on.
Chris?
I don't know if you'd call it a threat, but I think one of the issues that we have to deal with is, we learn in business school about segmentation and serving customer needs, and it's about picking the most profitable customers and serving them well. And the utility has a regulatory obligation to serve all customers. And that model has worked well for everyone in socializing costs, and also allows society to advance policies like energy efficiency. If that starts to unravel, what you have is the very best customers being served by one group, and then the low income. One client mentioned 50% of their customers are below the poverty line. So I think regulate the regulators that will make the decisions about what the utilities will do. So I think there's the loss of that social monopoly as well, the ability to drive policies that we want. We'll just have to figure out how that'll work.
Mm-hmm. I think we've seen evidence in the news that if we don't listen to the customer, and if we're not willing to have an engaged discussion with them, they will defect. MGM, $86 million, or $86.8 million, or close to 87, they paid to leave their utility. Microsoft, $23 million. And we met with one of the board members of MGM to say, did you just hate the utility that much? Was that your end goal all along? There was like nothing they were going to say that was going to make you stay. You were going. And the MGM board member said, no, we actually really wanted to, but we just couldn't get that discussion with them. And by the time they finally had the CEO come in, it was like way too late. They were way down the path. So I think those are very painful examples for that local utility, but it really reminds us that if we don't have the conversations with the customers, then there is the threat for some of them to go elsewhere.
Yeah.
And just to piggyback on that, I mean, customers, as you probably know, customers want choice. So, and we've deployed smart meters at all 5 million of our customer accounts, and we had about 1%, less than 1% of customers that did not want the smart meter. They didn't understand it. They thought it was going to create some magnetic fields and various theories like that. So a lot of it is education, which is okay. We don't run away from that. You have to educate your customers. But At the end of the day, just the fact that they were given the choice, that they didn't have to put in the smart meter, once we allowed them and said, look, this is not a must-do type of thing. You have choices, and here are your choices. Many of them opted, once we established that, to actually have the meter put in once they got some education. So I think a lot of times consumers will debate you, challenge you for just the right to have choice, even if I don't leave your service territory. But give me choice. It's just, it's kind of a free market type of mentality, which is a good thing.
So I want to follow up just a little bit on some of these points. So, Chris, you raised this interesting question about, the sort of social contract to provide energy services to everybody. And then, Sharon and others have been talking about, we need to respond to our customers. And of course, the type of customer that really engages with you and is making, demands or requests of you may not have the same preferences or the same needs as other parts of your customer base. So are there, utilities that are really struggling with that balance, or is this something that we haven't really had to deal with yet, but we can sort of see on the horizon? How do you protect the voice and the rights of, low-income populations while still providing services to the more vocal, usually higher income, larger customers?
I could take a stab at that. We have a very specific targeted low-income portfolio. So we absolutely ensure that in our energy efficiency programs that there's absolute participation and representation. Now, if I'm not an owner, I'm a renter, there are certain programs that are more inclined to participate in than others. So we recognize that. We also have a tremendous amount of neighborhood programs. So it's successful. You go in there and you're doing very basic retrofits that are very much appreciated, and it's a lot about education. So we make sure that that's obviously a consideration in everything we do. We get the voice of the customer. We have a lot of stakeholder meetings with community leaders and so forth. So it has to be a part. And I would say, at least in Florida, the constructive regulatory environment we have, that is very much front and center with our Public Service Commission.
Yeah. One of the things that was a surprise in the low income in this one particular utility is within their service territory. So I'm not going to say it applies to your gentlemen's, but in their service territory, amazingly, a lot of the low income had cell phones. And so, but they didn't pay their electric bill. They paid their cell phone bill, but they didn't pay their electric bill. And so one of the programs which became an extra way that they are servicing is they offered prepay to those particular customers who were struggling to pay their bill, and they enabled them to be able to do it via their phone. So, you could say it's providing extra services, and when you have a customer segment, you've got your big ones and your small ones, and really the utility is trying their best to serve all their customers, not just a few of them.
And two things that I've seen that clients are working hard on. One is getting the regulator comfortable with offering the tailored products and services and ruling on it in a speedy way, because if you're trying to keep up with the market and your regulatory cycle is long, you'll never be able to keep up with it. So that's, being able to tailor offerings to those segments. The other, though, is making sure that the business case is sound for some of these infrastructure investments, because when you're investing billions in the infrastructure and platform to serve, the savings and the value that's generated has to be there, or others will bear the burden for it.
I would say, too, another segment that's similar is, especially in South Florida, is elderly care. So, fixed income, fixed flat bill, budget bill, whatever you can do to make sure that my bill is pretty steady month after month. So they don't have to tweak with the Nest thermostat. They can get their bill flat with certainty. And let's face it, a lot of us are taking care of our parents, and it would be awesome if you lived here in North Carolina, your mom and dad was South Florida, and you could be certain electronically pay your bills, and it's this flat bill every month. It just takes a little bit of stress off.
And the opportunity that presents is, if you're able to make those investments in the assets that provide earnings, and it reduces energy usage, which reduces fuel costs, the utility has an opportunity in the middle of all this to be the one to enable all of these transactions. And even with load growth being not as good as it once was, there can be a win-win as we shift more from fuel to assets that make us all more efficient.
Terrific. Thank you. So Wayne, you've talked a little bit already about some of the ways that Florida Power and Light are engaging with customers, but what are some of the ways in which you're creating incentives for customers to basically help accomplish the utilities goals, whether it's demand side management or energy efficiency, et cetera?
Sure. So one of the things we're doing, several things we're doing in that area. So demand side management, it's the umbrella of energy efficiency, your traditional energy efficiency programs, and load management or demand response. So what we do is about 20%, 1 in 5 of our customers actually participate in our demand response program. And you have choices, again, customers want choices, you have choices as to what appliances that you can participate in that we'll actually call on in times of capacity needs or frequency response. And as we're seeing with the advent of solar, we're seeing more regulation, voltage, frequency response. So our close to 1 million customers actually feel like they're part of it. They're a virtual power plant, and they're getting incentives on a monthly basis that's cost effective. So one reason why I say that's cost effective is even if you're not a participant, it's still better off for your neighbor to be participating because we can avoid building a power plant with this tool. So it's huge, very popular program. And that's for residential and commercial customers and small business customers. The other areas, we have a portfolio of energy efficiency rebates. And being in South Florida, air conditioning is the big thing. In other areas, it may be lighting, but in 70% of our residential portfolio is air conditioning. And that's one of the appliances we actually use during demand response. So it's a nice win-win where somebody puts in a high efficiency air conditioning, they get a rebate towards it, but the relationship can continue as they can participate that appliance in our demand response. One of the things we're looking for now, it's a new use case we're literally just looking at now, is what other appliances in the home can we integrate? So can I give the customer the choice to say, doesn't matter what appliance, I will just develop a load curve, and when you need capacity, I will then go below my baseline and get an incentive on a cents per kilowatt hour basis. So those are the few, again, giving customers choices as to what appliance that they want to participate in. That's huge. And we are growing our electric vehicles. We're trying to encourage with not only just rebates, but maybe investing in charging infrastructure. So we're working with a lot of large EV manufacturers that are putting in several multi-megawatt locations. So you take a hospital that may be 2-3 megawatts, well, these folks are looking at 20 to 30 megawatts. So in one charging location, it could be the equivalent of 10 hospitals. So that requires some good planning, but you want to encourage that because in the future, maybe that's the next appliance. Maybe that electric vehicle is the next vehicle to the grid operations. And again, the consumers are excited about it because it gets a little bit of range anxiety out of the picture, but they can participate in making sure the grid is ready for the future.
Yeah, I think there's also an opportunity to think beyond incentives. I mean, certainly incentives are a big part of how we manage a lot of the programs today, but in some cases, those aren't always the most economically efficient tools to drive behavior. So, we're seeing a lot of pressure now to think about how we bring into the equation on-bill financing rather than a direct upfront incentive. And even in the extreme case, talking about how we set up marketplaces or platforms for customers to interact and transact that we might facilitate or not. I'm really interested in the blockchain discussion later today. But I think that's, there's the way our models have worked for some time now, and I think that's evolving, and the way in which we use these incentives to drive behavior is going to shift pretty dramatically over the next few years.
Okay. The audience has some pretty spectacular questions here, many of them. So I'm going to stop with my questions and turn to theirs because they're good. Okay, so I will just throw them out there, and people can feel free to jump in. So question number 1 from the audience: as customer engagement grows and customers opt for increasing energy efficiency in DERs, Does this signal a future where a utility simply manages the energy transactions among customers, like peer-to-peer, with a few central plants operating as well? Or how else do you see utility operations changing due to more customer involvement?
Well, that's a great question. You know, look, you don't have a right to manage it as a utility. There are many utilities out there that did a bad job in the past and lost that opportunity to manage it. So you're kind of like the tax collector. It's a line item on the bill, and you have no control over it. It's done by a third party. I would say that the way, at least perspective of Florida Power & Light, is we view energy efficiency as an essential part of the resource planning process. So it is integrated into the resource planning process. It's real, and it's rewarded as such. We believe in cost-effective energy efficiency and demand response, but it is absolutely part of the way we think in terms of planning for the future, and it does help us avoid building unnecessary power plants. We've avoided 14 mid-sized 400 megawatt power plants since the program has started. So it shows real value, real tangible, real benefits.
If the question is, there's a term out there, distribution system operator, who would manage the transactions among all the parties. I think that concept makes sense, and the role, a utility could play a central role in that, because they're balancing the majority of the transactions on the system to begin with. There was a debate in New York as to whether that's a role the utility should have or not. They came down on the side that they could be the system operator. But I think that's right. I mean, I think the trend is towards, if there are going to be multiple transactions as part of this more networked grid, someone, maybe blockchain will do it by itself, but I think there will be a need to do that, and the utility is perfectly positioned to do that.
We're testing it right now. I mean, you mentioned New York. We actually have in Buffalo, New York right now, the first instance of a distribution system platform that we're trying to assemble. We've got a handful of customers who have signed up to participate. We're working with a company called Opus One that's going to deliver the platform. So, jury's out. I mean, I think that's what we're trying to figure out is, is there a role for utilities? Can they add value? I mean, I think that's the question we keep coming back to is, we could debate what role we should or shouldn't have, but I think if we focus on finding ways to create value, then we'll have a seat at the table. And so I don't know what that's going to look like 5 years from now, but as we test and explore and innovate, that's kind of what guides us.
Great. Okay, can any of you talk about the way that customers are reacting to privacy concerns in the smart home and smart office? We'll stop with that.
Well, the reactions are rather varied. So me and Chris were in Europe together, 2 weeks ago or so, and we were amazed when we brought this up. They were like, nobody cares over here in Europe. They make their information readily available. So they didn't seem at all concerned about privacy. Here in the US, it's been a sensitive topic. It got a little bit out of control. Very small number of people, loud voices, makes the television during the smart meter rollout days. And it's kind of calmed down a little bit. Most utilities during that period of time, if they didn't end up having to, so I'm curious whether you guys did, had to put some sort of privacy policy and statement in place. And when it comes to personal information, utility, most, so we'll ask the gentlemen who represent utilities, most would say the customer owns the information, and information isn't readily put out there. If it is aggregated to the point where it can't be attributed to one individual in terms of their uses. So there's a lot of sensitivity in terms of information that is and is not allowed to be released on individual customers. But
yeah, I see the sensitivity around data more among market participants than customers. For customers, I think it's sort of generational. I think younger generations are very comfortable with data moving about in lots of different forums. Less so for other groups of customers, but where we really see the most debate happening and the most tension occurring is among those who would want to interact and transact with and around utilities. And so, back to the question of who owns the data, we have a longstanding partnership with OPower, and that was a huge challenge early on, figuring out how much data we could share with them, not just because whether we did or didn't want to share the data, but whether or not the regulators would allow us to. There's very strict requirements that we have to adhere to, and so that was a huge effort to undertake to get that program up and running. Now that we've kind of broken the glass on that, I think we're seeing more following in its path. But that's where I see the tension is among the market participants more so than with customers.
I would agree with that. I also think it depends on how you introduce it. For example, I mentioned we have 800,000 customers that participate in our demand response program. We control appliances, so they're familiar with that. So one of the things we're looking at now with the advent of more granular data available, 5-minute interval data available, it's potential now where we can tease out if a water heater has a leak, right? So we see a signature on that. We can tease out if it's time for the air conditioner to have the filter changed. So if you went to a customer who's not familiar with that and gave them that information, they may get a little anxious as to Big Brother's watching. But if you go to the 800,000 customers that already believe in the program and are participating, now this is just a deeper value-added offering or a relationship that you built with them, that may be better received.
I think that kind of goes back to the opportunity, whether you're a third party or whether you're a utility, the whole education. And what we've seen is when people, before rolling out a program, plan in and have a plan to engage their customers and educate them on what new is coming down. Really, this whole topic of privacy is one of education such that people don't put it out of perspective.
But the foundation of that is how important data is to the future. If everything we've talked about today presumes that data about storage devices or EVs or energy efficiency is going to be moving around, and the privacy is one issue, the standards are the other, is what data, how frequent, and how it's shared, and who gets, even in the market participants, who gets it, that's still to be worked out.
Right. There was a follow-up question about precisely that, who gets the data. So, sometimes there's legitimate uses for the utility data, like in the areas of building science, facility automation, and how do we secure and share those data with people who may have legitimate uses for it.
Right. I think we're getting better on that. So one of the things I know that my previous organization did to help enable and facilitate the marketplace is there was always the complaint from third parties, again, on complaining about utilities, saying they couldn't get access to their usage data. And with DOE funding, we kicked off, and this funding, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, something called Green Button, which is a standard way that any third party can get access to their interval or usage data that then they can bring into their building management systems or their analytics platforms to do work. And that wasn't a mandated thing, that was an industry grassroots effort that was done and has been adopted by a number of third parties and a number of utilities. So.
I think another thing too that's pretty cool is there's a huge initiative you've not heard about, smart cities. It's really looking at just not energy but water conservation and sensors everywhere. What's the optimum time that a garbage container is half full or 3/4 full. So it's really, really good urban planning and smart cities concepts. But one of the things that we see now is a lot of working with our cities who want to go through this initiative to establish a baseline on energy usage. So rather than have to get permission from every office building owner in that city, we've aggregated up some usage platforms that allows the city and the team that's working on this to establish a baseline to then measure performance moving forward. So there are various levels of data that's available, and you can avoid some of this issue about privacy.
Great. Okay, I really like this one. So it would seem that the smart thermostat is more engaged with the utility than is the customer that owns that thermostat. And it seems more likely that electric vehicles, particularly autonomous vehicles, will interact with utilities and energy markets to figure out when to best charge themselves. So this person is wondering if customer engagement, as we currently understand it, will be usurped by a future of smart devices basically talking to one another?
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge debate that do you even need a thermostat in the home of the future? So it's, do you get a smart node that controls the home, automation, lighting, and your cooling needs? So maybe the days of a smart thermostat as a device itself may be numbered, right? So you may be able to control all your appliances with your phone and a smart node in the home. So, the future's pretty open with that.
But I do think, and I'm more in that camp, is that devices interacting with each other is more likely to yield the results than behavioral changes. We don't even want to get up to change the channel on the TV. But if you flip a switch and say, I opt into a program that allows my car to charge when the rates are low enough, and it's sitting there anyway, I don't know, I don't care. When we were in Australia, the water heaters are controlled. 80% of the water heaters are controlled. They have an excess of solar in the middle of the day, so they turn them on in the middle of the day, the utility does, and turn them off at the end of the day. And I couldn't do that behaviorally. Also, I never thought of it that I don't care, because after I take my shower in the morning, I'm gone. I don't need it to reheat itself right away. So that's an example where people don't even have to interact. It happens for them. It's really one choice they make at that point versus having to continue to interact. Now, there will be other aspects where they want to interact, but I think there's a future for that.
Well, I think it comes back to customer values. I mean, I think you can imagine all the incredible ways in which we can interact with our energy consumption, but to your exact point, not many of us have the time to do that. We want it to be simple, and so I don't think the devices will ever operate truly independently. I think we'll still need to configure, we'll still need to set preferences, we'll still need to establish what we want as consumers, and then the system can, in far more advanced ways than we see today, respond to those preferences. And I think that's the promise of technology applied and across our infrastructure.
Great. So earlier in the panel, Sharon, you mentioned when you had a smart device in your home a long time ago, and you'd go to your neighbors and say, this is what I learned, and they're like, whatever. But now, many of these third-party providers like Opower and others, sometimes the utilities, are sending us in our bills every month, this is how you compare to your neighbors, or smiley face or frowny face. And I find people actually now do kind of care how they learning from their neighbors. Have you seen changes in the way customers learn about electricity savings opportunities from their neighbors, from some of these more competitive programs that are out there?
I think it's a segment of people who are very much into it, and it all kind of goes down to customer segmentation. There's a class of customer who doesn't care, and so for those that care, having that for them is very informational. I'll tell you, on my street, so Duke Energy doesn't use Opower, they use Tendril, which is a similar thing. So if you happen to live in North Carolina and get one of those, it's not from Opower, it's from Tendril. But my neighbors were all irritated that they were always showing yellow or whatever. And I was irritated too, because I'm like, my house is efficient. Why am I not green? Because I've put way more into my house I will ever recover economically. And so I finally was complaining to the CEO of Tendril about it. And he's like, well, what's the square footage of your house? And I was telling him, and then I went back and looked at the report. My report was being run on I was being compared with people who were smaller houses than me. So he told me how to change it online at Duke so that I could get a better, more accurate. So I think if you have a good experience, it motivates you. It can have a boomerang if you like. In my case, it was like not showing a good number, so it was irritating to me. So I guess it depends.
Yeah, I would agree with Sharon, and I've heard similar stories about the frowny face or the yellow, green, red face. But one of the things we're looking at is a platform to allow that homeowner a personalized plan on how they can improve on their baseline, because it's about control, convenience. Everybody's lifestyle is different. So you're going to have to establish how they optimize the best they can for that premise in their home given their lifestyle, versus necessarily the neighborhood to neighborhood. The gamification is fun. I mean, people are competitive, so to the extent you can make that exciting, not the frowny faces, but to make it exciting with reward points or things like that, that's kind of cool. But yeah, I've heard some debate on the smiley faces.
And I think the question going forward is, 10, 15 years ago, it was all about price. We've connected it with environmental stewardship and the environment. And I think that's made some fundamental shift. The question is how much staying power that has. But I do think there's, as I said earlier, I think there's been a difference in the way people look at their relationship with energy is a little different. I think it still depends on the segment, who engages with that. But there's more engagement in that.
So one of the audience members asked, excuse me, as the energy mix continues to evolve, customers are voicing their opinions to help change policies about net metering and other ways to help customers participate in the modernization of the grid. What are your thoughts about that aspect of customer engagement?
Customers are absolutely engaging in policy decisions or discussions. Some obviously more vocally than others. Probably the biggest thing that we've seen in the Northeast recently was a debate on natural gas pipelines and capacity. And it was really intriguing to see how these unfold. I'm going to keep coming back to the theme, you got to listen to your customers. We, as a company, we identified the need for incremental gas capacity to serve customers in the Northeast. We did the math, we did the analysis, we did the design work, and we had a really strong business case. A case that showed that this would be very economically beneficial to our customers. What we missed was the overriding value around decarbonization. And so what we saw unfold then in the debate, in the public debate, was a really strong reaction to any incremental carbon-based energy supply, so much so that basically those projects are not going to move forward at this point in time. So that leaves you with a question, right? Which is, how do you then respond to that? And I think the answer is pretty simple. You can regret the circumstances, you can try to rethink it, but what you really have to do is go back to what do customers want. And so what we have to figure out, I think, all of us, not just utilities, but the collective of folks involved in energy, is how do you deliver a decarbonized system without leaving customers behind? How do you strike that balance between making sure that your low-income customers are as taken care of as your most vocal environmental advocates, and come up with the designs, the solutions, the answers, the technology that delivers on both of those two outcomes. And people can say that's impossible. I don't think it is. I think that's what we have to commit ourselves to.
Great. Okay, I think we have time for one last question. All right. So, how do you see the relationship with the customer, the opportunities and threats for that differing between the regulated markets and the deregulated markets?
I ran our national accounts group for several years back in the early 2000s, and you had national account customers like a Walmart with footprint in your territory, and then you had outside. So I think you have to approach customers, regulated or non-regulated, with understanding their basic needs, no doubt about it. So there's not much difference there. What could be different is in deregulated markets, speed to market, competition, further choice is critical. So I think you have to, even if you're in a regulated market, you can't hide behind that. You have to treat your customers as if they had choice, right? So what we try to do is serve the footprint of those customers in our regulated entity as if they were getting products from an unregulated market. Obviously, we have the rules and regulation that we have, but you can't hide behind that. It's no excuse for not having speed to service, great customer service, and customer experiences. And then you take advantage of regulatory markets outside that allow you to be profitable and make money.
Well, one thing about that question is we still 25, 30 years later, still have differences in this country, regulated and deregulated markets. And so the answers to all the things we've been talking about today, I think, will also probably be different we won't have one answer, and to the point earlier about scenarios, there'll be different scenarios around the country of how these things will play out.
Yeah, so kind of adding to, I mean, I think what this means, whether you're in the regulated or unregulated side, whether, not all our sites are unbundled and deregged, but the future, and it's no different for any other industry, so it's not like our sector is unique, but I think the realization that you need to innovate, and whether you're on the regulated side, you need to be an innovator to look at what are the things we need to be doing to preparing for the future and offering new bundled services for our customer. And if you're on the deregulated side, you're trying to look at how do I innovate to extract value in my deliver to a customer. So for either side, I think the key for the future is continuing to innovate and not just nurture your existing assets.
Great. Okay, well, please join me in thanking our panelists and thanking Jenna Wiener, who was the person who organized this panel, along with Liz and Yochai, who have organized the whole day, because I think, at least I feel like I learned a lot from this panel. So thanks to all of you.